Hello, listener friends. In this episode of The Bridge, I talked to Adam again, and we had planned to also include Aaron Franz in our discussion, but he had to work late, and it was quite late for Adam, but we did have a really great conversation about how our concepts of being human have changed over the years under the influence of transhumanism. Before we get to that discussion, I do want to give everybody an update on what's going on with Yellow Thunder Food Sovereignty, which is my family's hunger and food insecurity project that we're working on to feed our hungry community members and ourselves. We're attempting to gain some sort of food sovereignty for our own family as well in the process. So we've got 40 bales of straw that we're doing experimental straw bale gardening with. Ms. Jikia has got the entire fence set up. It's 90 by 100 feet. Half of that is dirt that we've plowed, and so we're going to put stuff in dirt and in the straw bales and then observe which does better. Our strawberries from last year came back, so we're going to add to our little strawberry patch. I planted one little row of different things in one of the straw bales. It's lettuce, cabbage, and broccoli in one row. And then I have already planted some cucumbers, and then I've started some seeds of garden beans and tomatoes. And I also have some trays of okra that I've started by seed that are almost ready to go in, and more cucumbers. And we have a lot of stuff that we're going to plant: corn, beet, squash, do another Three Sisters garden as well. That's what's going on with Yellow Thunder Food Sovereignty. If you want to check out pictures and what's going on, you can always find us on Facebook. Type in Yellow Thunder Food Sovereignty and you should be able to find us. My husband does a lot of managing of that page. I do a little bit with that, but mostly you can also find this show, The Bridge with Kira, on Facebook as well. Got a like page for that. I thought also of letting you know about how you can support the radio show itself. As you know, I live in the woods and I have really terrible internet service that I have to pay a lot for. I only get 20 gigabytes of data to use per month during the hours of 8 a.m. to like 2 a.m. in the morning. And then I have like all of this other data that I can use between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. So I end up running out of that 20 gigs really, really quick producing this radio show. I have to actually record it off-site because the ping rate is too slow for me to grab the stream or get a good conversation going on Skype because there's a huge delay. So I actually record it at another location from my truck, like I'll go to Starbucks or someplace like that. I don't use the internet of the place where I'm at for recording because frequently that's interrupted and calls are dropped, so I actually use a hotspot on my iPhone to do that. But anyway, I thought I would play for you the little conversation that I have with the computer when I run out of data. So check this out.
You can say billing and payments, technical support, or say update my account information, change my service, or check on my rebate.
Technical support.
Just a moment while I check your system status. Okay, we see that you have exceeded your data allowance and become subject to our fair access policy, which temporarily reduces your plan speeds. Are you calling because you're experiencing slow service?
Yes.
You do not currently have any restore tokens available to redeem. You can purchase additional bandwidth to release you from the fair access policy and restore plan speeds. Press 1 to purchase 500 megabytes for $5. Press 2 to purchase 1 gigabyte for $9. Press 3 to buy 2 gigabytes for $16. To hear the options again, press the OK. Once we purchase the restore token, your data allowance will be reset. To confirm you want to purchase a token, please enter or say the zip code where you have service. Thanks. You're all set. We've applied the token, and your speeds should be restored shortly. Next time you can save a phone call by going to supportcenter.hughesnet.com, where you can always purchase and view your available tokens. Even if you're subject to the Fair Access Policy, you can still access the website. Again, that's supportcenter.hughesnet.com.
So that is me buying 2 gigs of data for $16 to work on this podcast and upload it to my podcast storage page. That's on top of $118 for the 20 gigs that I run out of very quickly. So if you would want to support the radio show, you can hit the donate button on the podcast storage page or go directly to paypal.com and just put in my email address, which is valkyra1969@gmail.com, and that's VALKYRA 1969@gmail.com. If you want to support Yellow Thunder Food Sovereignty Project, we have a donate button set up on my blog, Psychopaths in Charge, which is at www.kyoung4.wordpress.com. And again, you can just go straight to the PayPal site itself and put in my email address if you don't want them getting a cut, which is how it works if you use the donate button. So please enjoy this show tonight, and thanks so much for listening and supporting me and sharing my work and giving me your feedback. Thanks. Hi everybody, welcome to the bridge. It is May 23rd, 2015, and we're doing a live show tonight. I should have known not to come back to live during Mercury retrograde, but I did it anyway because I'm stubborn and because I want to do what I want to do. So, we are going to have a little conversation tonight. We're trying to have 3 people in 3 different time zones getting together to have the same conversation. And we're going to do the best we can. So I would like to welcome Adam back to have another conversation. Welcome, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Hopefully Aaron will be able to show up and we'll be able to maybe talk for a while about some of these things we'd planned on talking about. I should probably caution the audience and say that I actually got the schedule for this a bit mixed up, and as a result I'm a lot more tired than I expected to be. Things are sort of running a bit later than I expected them to run, so forgive me if I'm a bit off tonight. I'm pretty tired, but nonetheless I'm sure we'll have a good talk nonetheless. Yeah.
So we're going to take a little break from the series that we began together last week, in last week's broadcast about the alternative media, and talk a little bit about how humanity's perception of what it means to be human has changed over the years due to the influence of the transhuman agenda. So I have something recent in the news that just to get us started with something really bizarre and horrifying is yesterday a woman in Florida was forced to sign a consent form allowing her 4-year-old son to be circumcised because that's what the father wanted, and she's been battling him legally for the entire child's life. And she was finally forced. It was basically the court saying, if you ever want to see your kid again, you will sign this paper and allow him to be circumcised. And she was in a courtroom and she had been arrested, and it was a terrible situation. And the reason that I link it to transhumanism is that transhumanism, underneath it is the idea that we're not perfect as we are. We're not born perfect. We have to surgically alter ourselves. We have to do various unnecessary things to ourselves to somehow make us better. So I don't know if you've heard about this story, but just wanted to get your thoughts on what this all means.
Yeah, well, I mean, excuse me, circumcision is held by many people to be something that is essentially a form of basically dominance, manipulation, and sadism. A lot of people feel, mostly in the secular, demographics, etc., that this is, something that's completely unnecessary for any true legitimate health reason or anything else, and that this is some kind of archaic, sadistic ritual that is actually quite dark and really does amount to just genital mutilation to, I guess, impose some kind of or imbue some kind of fear, into the child on some level, and to have some kind of psychological impact on them. But I mean, in the grander scheme of things, in the bigger picture, it is, as you say, in something that is all about altering the human body, on the presumption that the human body is unsatisfactory in its current form. This is obviously a very ancient, archaic belief which goes back a long, long time, to do with perfecting that which was left imperfect, by the grand architect, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, we can see this kind of thinking in so many areas of society around us. I mean, even if people think about the whole idea of tattoos and piercings and things like that, I mean, they've been around for a while, but I sometimes wonder as to whether those particular memes, shall we say, or trends have been promoted so as to normalize the concept and acclimate the public to the idea that the human body is something that can be alterable and that should be alterable. And so, again, getting back to circumcision, I think this is probably some form. I mean, I think a lot of it is more to do with religious reasons, and but I think again there may be some aspects to that which tie into this sort of underlying ideology that the human body is something that man, who wants to become God ostensibly, should change, alter, update, improve in some way. So yeah, it definitely fits in with the overall line of thinking, I suppose.
And we have, of course, the so-called legal or justice system involved in enforcing that, and enforcing the father's so-called religious rights over the child's, right not to be mutilated, and the mother's right to protect her child. So why, how is the father's so-called religious right? It's odd to me now. I mean, it's in America that religious rights are about forcing your will on others, not about your right just to practice your own religion anymore.
Two very, very different things, obviously, yeah. I think in the UK it's a little bit different. I work in the public health sector, and I review a lot of documentation and articles around the subject of, the public health system, etc. And I know that I think it's slightly different here. There are certain provisions in place. There's a lot of debate amongst doctors in the various committees as to whether this is something that should be allowed for in the public health system, or should be confined to private religious practitioners, physicians, or something that should be outlawed altogether. And it's been quite controversial, but I think it's probably a little bit different, and that there's a little bit less of the, I suppose, religion superseding all other interests. At least insofar as I'm aware. I've not come across any particular cases that bear resemblance to the one that you've just outlined, but that is very weird, yeah, that's still going on today, and that, the religious right, so to speak, at least that's what it's, ostensibly called and believed to be, is superseding the basic human right.
Yeah, and medically, doctors seem to, in America at least, go back and forth between, there being any sort of medical need for it, but there obviously isn't any medical need at all. And, a child cannot consent to unnecessary cosmetic surgery, which amounts to mutilation. So if there's no medical need and there's no consent, then, it's wrong. It's simple. real simple.
Well, obviously, yeah. I still do think that a lot of this, in this particular example, I think a lot of it comes down to a certain religious mode of thinking, to do with punishment, and to do with Puritanism, and to do with, I suppose, preventing the child, or inhibiting it in some way, shall we say, restricting its ability to conceive and perceive pleasure in some way. Because, the actual act of circumcision destroys, I don't know how many thousands of nerve endings, but a lot, and so it actually does have a long-term permanent effect on that individual's ability, to enjoy, sex in the future. So, it's almost a form of, a lifelong punishment in a way. So there is a very dark, sadistic element to it, I feel, anyway.
Yeah, and it's a punishment for being born human, and in America, male. And I think my own theory is that it's another part of this transhuman agenda would be to separate that bond between mother and child. And so when the birth process itself is traumatic enough, and then you add this, mutilation on top of it, it really interferes with the baby's ability to bond and to get over the trauma of birth, because it has this other trauma on top of it.
Yeah, actually, that's a quite interesting point, because, there are plenty of other examples that we can look at in society over the past, say, 50 or 60 years, or what have you, where there does seem to have been an effort to destroy the traditional and very deep bonding that occurs between a newborn baby and the mother during the very first formative years, when it's an infant, a toddler. I think if we look at the move of women into the workplace after the feminism movement, and I'm not saying that's entirely a bad thing as an absolute by any means at all, but what I'm saying is that is one of many examples that we can look at of things that have had the impact of separating the mother from the child at a very, very young age, and destroying that deep maternal nourishing bond. So I definitely think that if we look at circumcision as in terms of traumatizing a child at a very, very young age, and putting it through something which it has to process and deal with in some very, very rudimentary way, according to the very underdeveloped psychology of the child at the time, that it would have some kind of peripheral effect on the child's ability to bond with the mother at a young age. And there are probably, interests out there who would seek for that to be the case, and would want that to happen for their own particular socio-political agendas.
And then you add on top of it vaccinations, and formula feeding. So formula, it not only takes that bonding that happens when a mother breastfeeds her child, but takes away the immunization of whatever the mother has been exposed to. She's developed antibodies and she's passing that on through her breast milk. And then also a child develops a healthy gut lining by breastfeeding as well. And so the gut lining is destroyed, and then the child is fed food-like substances that really isn't food anymore on top of that. So all of that is part of what I think goes into the skyrocketing rates of autism in America that are above and beyond polio and all of the other epidemics that the medical community has responded to in years past. But somehow this autism, it's beyond epidemic. It's way beyond epidemic. Is something that, it's a mystery. They basically are like, it's a mystery, but it's not. It's not a mystery. I've seen parents change the eating habits of their children, find out what their children are sensitive to, and remove that from their diet, and the child makes a complete and total turnaround with their autism. So, and some kids are worse off than others, but all of it, it's a culmination of multiple traumas that are happening to children. And to bring back what you were talking about before with the tattoos and the piercings, and I very much think that's an agenda that's been pushed to get people used to the idea of altering themselves, because it's gotten very, very extreme with people putting implants in and under their skin just to make themselves look different, or so talk about unnecessary surgical procedures. That's the epitome right there.
Well, I mean, the whole sort of concept, I suppose, of what a tattoo has changed remarkably in the last, I don't know, maybe 80 to 100 years, maybe more. But originally, a tattoo was something that very few people had, and it would be a sign of having undergone some particular hardship, or having undergone some particularly difficult walk in life. It would be something for sailors and vagrants and people who had maybe done time in the military or in prison camps or what have you. It was kind of a mark of what they'd been through, and it was often looked down upon and frowned upon by the rest of society. I mean, that eventually sort of became more popular in the kind of criminal underworld, so to speak, with gangs. There was a very sort of strong connection there with gangs, people on the fringes of society, for people on the wrong side of the law, etc. But I mean, these days, the whole concept has transitioned into mainstream pop culture, where you walk out in the street in any given city anywhere, and it seems like everybody's covered in tattoos from head to toe. And it's become, especially over the past 5 to 10 years, I would say, so popular as to the point that more people of a certain generation, and for argument's sake, we'll say maybe 20 to 40, around there maybe, more people have tattoos than don't. It seems to me anyway, and maybe that's just a geographical thing as to where I live or the places I've visited, but it's an observation I've made nonetheless. And so when we take that and think about the fact that not so long ago in the course of human history, this particular act of drawing on the body or marking the body in some way was seen completely differently and was done for completely different reasons. It's quite amazing, because I think it's quite obviously been very, very heavily marketed and promoted and pushed into mainstream culture and into pop culture, so as to acclimate people once again toward the concept of modifying their bodies and doing things to their bodies that are permanent to change them or make them better or make them more appealing or make them more desirable in some way. And so it's just really a stepping stone towards, the next thing, which is, of course, I mean, if you look at some of the technology that's come out from like Nokia, the phone company, I mean, they have actually created a phone which is operated by an electronic tattoo, and this is a permanent thing that goes under the skin, and so you've actually got buttons, sort of with lights on them sitting under your skin, and you can push a little button, and you've got a screen that comes up on the skin, and it's, I mean, this would never ever have been possible. People would never ever have considered anything like this had it not been for tattoos. They had been prepared over the years through this saturation in tattoo culture and the whole concept of drawing on the skin and making permanent markings on the skin, and that being all very, very normal. And so the next logical step was to start implanting and incorporating other elements into the body in the same way that a tattoo would be. So for the generation that we're talking about here, this seems like a very logical step.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting that tattooing used to be a form of basically marked you because of some sort of rite of passage or hardship that you endured. But piercing as well originally comes from the Lakota sun dance. And the way the whole modern primitive piercing culture started was by one man in the 1970s, going to a Lakota sun dance and getting pierced. And for those of you who don't know what the sun dance is, it's one of the 7 sacred ceremonies of the Lakota people, and sun dancers are called. It's a yearly around the summer solstice. The sun dancers in a ceremony will dance in the hot sun without food or water for 4 days, and then also some of the dancers get pierced as well. And it's a sacrifice. It's the sun dancers are making this sacrifice for life to continue. That's the reason for the ceremony. So this one white man in the 70s went and he got pierced, and he had these visions, and then he took piercing out of the sacred ceremony of the Lakota people and out into the rest of the world, and created this whole culture of piercing, taught people how to pierce, and so then it became fashion instead of ritual. So yeah. It's interesting.
I think that's happened with a number of different phenomena and memes. You have a very common theme of someone from the Western world, say some kind of eccentric individual or fringe supported and given a lot of money to go and visit some tribe and take and sort of absorb themselves in a particular aspect of their rituals or something, and then bringing that back to the Western world. I mean, it happened with people like the Beatles going to India and talking to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and bringing back the whole transcendental meditation movement. We have people like Terence McKenna, David Icke going down to South America and smoking ayahuasca with the tribes down there and bringing all of that back into Western mainstream pop culture. And there are numerous other sort of examples. Dr. Rick Strassman was another one. He was another academic that was funded by the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry Foundation, no less, to go and do all this research on DMT and ayahuasca and bring that back into sort of more mainstream academic spheres within the Western world. But again, we see this pattern of I suppose Western interests looking at some of the aspects of older, more tribally based cultures and some of the rituals and customs that they have, and taking those almost on a very, very sort of base level and bringing them back to the Western world and just saturating the pop culture with them. Because I mean, if you take the DMT example or the ayahuasca example, the ayahuasca ritual in South America, and it's practiced by a number of different tribes throughout the region, but it involves a very lengthy process of actually boiling this brew and adding a whole bunch of other different leaves and herbs to the mixture, so as to induce a very, very specific journey, which is supposed to be guided by a shaman and is supposed to have a number of different steps and processes and movements through the whole experience. But what was brought back to the Western world as a result of Western people going over and investigating this type of stuff was really just the very most base version of that in the DMT molecule or the DMT substance, at least anyway. And so that is what has been presented to people in Western cultures as nothing sacred whatsoever, but something more like something that's just a street drug, which gives you a novelty 10, 15-minute high or whatever, a very intense one apparently, but nonetheless, the true sacred meaning has been taken out of it, and it's just been turned into something which has no real meaning for people. I mean, a lot of people who take this stuff would disagree with me, but I think there's a definite trend there.
Yeah, and there's that cultural appropriation as well. Going on with that whole process, and in
that's what it is. Yeah.
And the native belief system is that everything has a spirit, plants, animals, even rocks, everything has a spirit, and the shaman's job is to communicate with those spirits and guide those people on that journey. So it really opens these people up to, I think, dark forces to invade their consciousness. So I wonder, I fear for those people. And I do think it's possible for Westerners to go and do that in a good way, but I think it's probably rare as well.
I think it is rare. I mean, there have been plenty of examples of people going and doing the full ceremony and things like that, but I think for the majority, in terms of the Western pop cultural demographics, if you will, it's just getting your hands on the most active ingredient of this particular drug, which is used in a lengthy ritual, and just getting a quick high off that. So it's kind of cultural assimilation and appropriation without any of the benefits, so to speak, of the ritual, because as you were saying, the whole ritual process in that respect, in terms of the original process and tradition employed by these tribes would involve something much deeper and much more profound, where you are actually guided through a process for a specific reason, and where your mind was open to things that it was would not normally be open to, and so you needed someone to sort of, I suppose, guide you and help you through that process, and almost help protect the psyche in a way. And to have that same kind of substance, just floating around on the streets in Western countries without any kind of guidance, perhaps it is opening up the mind to things that aren't very good for it, and that perhaps are quite dark. I think that's definitely possible, and I've actually talked with Thomas Sheridan about this very phenomenon, and we both felt that this is probably something that we're going to see more of in the coming years, is the DMT thing becoming much, much more popular in Western culture, but having a very, very significant fallout effect due to the lack of guidance and the lack of real respect for the ritual and the tradition and the deeper metaphysical sort of aspects of the whole thing.
Right, and I have this instinctive feeling that it's in the future it's going to be much more tied into, it's going to be much more obviously tied into the transhuman agenda.
Oh yeah, it has been intrinsically linked with the transhuman agenda since it became popular in the West. I mean, ever since Rick Strassman went down and did his research and brought it back to the States, and people like Terence McKenna got involved through all of these what I call like New Age research centers in California, all these kind of trusts and foundations and NGOs and sort of academic research institutes that have been funded by the big banking foundations to, study certain cultures and figure out what kind of cultural techniques and memes and ideas can be used to their advantage in Western cultures, etc. And so, through the sort of the mixing and merging of ideas throughout those types of organizations, most especially in the 1960s and 70s. You had people like, Rick Strassman, talking to people like Terence McKenna. And if you look at Terence McKenna's sort of interpretation of what all this meant, in his work, sort of I suppose when he started to go public in like the late 80s, early 90s, and then even more so towards his death in the late 90s, I think it was 99, or maybe 98, he made numerous references to a very, very overt transhuman ideology. His interpretation of what he had experienced through ayahuasca, and through the sort of philosophical, metaphysical discussions he had been party to in some of these New Age research centers in California. He very much felt that the relationship between humans and this particular molecule was analogous to the relationship between humans and machines, and that humans, machines, plants, that everything was just all one. And this all tied into his 2012 theory, this time wave zero theory, and that everything was going to merge. And if you look at what he's saying in the sort of, I suppose, the tenets of that theory, it really just is tantamount to Ray Kurzweil's singularity theory. And there's a lot of the same rhetoric being used. So, yeah, there's a definite transhuman spin to the type of things that Terence McKenna was talking about in terms of ayahuasca and DMT. So those two subjects have been intrinsically linked for a long time. And so, yeah, I would absolutely expect that the proliferation of these types of drugs throughout Western culture is going to result in a definite kind of cross-cultural coagulation with the transhuman movement, the transhuman ideologies.
Yeah, because it's all about consciousness. And the manipulation of it, the expansion and contraction of it. So I think that these type of New Age institutes are really interested in figuring out those mysteries of the consciousness and how to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and
Absolutely.
I think they really think that DMT is going to unlock it for them.
Yeah. That could. Yeah, that sort of stands to reason, because that's obviously one of the most sought after scientific answers is what is consciousness, and this is the question that not one scientist in the history of time has ever been able to actually satisfactorily answer. Mainstream scientists still today, admit that they really don't have any explanation for what consciousness is, and in higher sort of elite circles, they often refer to it as the ghost in the machine, and that human beings are simply machines that can be programmed at will, using certain scientific techniques and all the other techniques that are available to them, but that you will always encounter the occasional individual, and their studies, often cited them to be around about 20% of the population who would have something like a ghost, what they call the ghost in this machine, some kind of consciousness, some kind of metaphysical, intangible awareness that could not be scientifically quantified. They found that with a lot of people, they were able to manipulate them into a state of almost complete compliance, but they found that there was always this remaining percentile that were just not able to be manipulated and had this innate something that could not be scientifically quantified by any means at all. And I'm not saying that people who can be manipulated don't have consciousness, but this has been one of their major goals. These sort of technocratic elites for a very, very long time is discovering what consciousness actually is, and so maybe this whole DMT thing is part of that, and is an effort on some part to try and further understand this mystery.
Yeah, that's what my gut tells me about the whole DMT proliferation and transhumanism is about that consciousness. And then the other side of it is, basically teaching that your body isn't sacred, that it's just sort of, the meat package you find yourself in. There's nothing special about it. So you can alter it, pierce it, tattoo it, do whatever to it. And then the nightmarish, it could be used simply for energy, like a battery, or, like the Matrix nightmare. So if we go back to the whole piercing thing and the altering thing, that's what psychopaths do to us. They alter us. Our experience with psychopaths on the individual level and on the scaled up level, as the ones in charge, it's a traumatic exchange. Or every time we run up against the psychopath, it's a traumatic exchange. And there's an energy harvesting that's going on both on individual level and scaled up on a societal level. And part of what I started to observe in the 90s when piercing really became popular was the type of people that would become piercers. A lot of times they would be tattoo artists, and that was just maybe a side business that they got into. But the people who sort of addictively started getting pierced, just like the people who addictively tattoo themselves or get themselves tattooed, I observed this, and I was doing a college project about it. So I did a lot of observing of piercings, and I noticed that there were some people doing it that really got something out of it, like almost as if they were harvesting the energy off that person's pain or something when they pierced them. And it really turned me off to it. And it got me thinking about, wow, there's something at the time I didn't know, but there's something way deeper to this.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, because I'd never actually contemplated that particular aspect or possibility before. I've obviously met plenty of people who have been fanatical tattoo artists or tattoo addicts, and who just like covered head to toe, and they even have them on their foreheads and stuff, and nice people and etc. But to sort of have this weird compulsion to just keep drawing on their bodies and to just use up every available piece of non-tattooed skin to draw something else. But I hadn't really considered the whole concept of the tattoo artist actually sadistically drawing some kind of dark energy through this process of it almost has biblical connotations in some way. When they talk about the Book of Revelations and the mark of the beast, it kind of almost, I don't know whether there's anything there to that, but it does have a kind of sadistic feel to it in terms of the act of using a painful instrument to mark a person for life. Even though that individual may have requested it and may be excited about it and want it to happen. I think that's still something kind of sadistic, and perhaps, if we go back to the whole question of, the whole idea of what I was talking about before in terms of how the public perception of what tattoos has changed so rapidly over the years. If we look back to maybe 100 years ago, if someone was, lying down being tattooed upon, they would probably freak out and resist and say, no, don't do this to me. You're marking my body forever. Stop it. I don't want this. Whereas today we're in a scenario where people go into these tattoo parlors and pay through the nose to have this done to them. And so perhaps there has been some kind of sadistic, psychopathic agenda to really, really twist the whole idea of what a tattoo is and push it into pop culture so that people will actually demand it rather than resist it.
Yeah, that's what I think. And you also think about the institutional type of tattoos, the Army tattoo, the Navy tattoo, the Marines tattoo. All of those are, now I'm property. I'm property now, not a person, but property.
Well, that's a big thing with the military. Even the terminology they use. When you become the lowest ranked soldier in the military is a private, and so I mean that really tells you everything you need to know right there. You're private property. You're no longer a member of the public. You literally transfer from being public to private. You are now privately owned. And so when we talk about the other types of tattoos that are used throughout these military institutions, there's definitely a kind of sense of inventory and ownership there, with the types that all those sort of pledge allegiance to a specific unit. There's kind of quite a dark kind of theme to that as well, for sure.
Yeah, and imagine the thought process that is involved in accepting that brand, becoming branded.
Well, yeah, just especially for males. I mean, the whole bonding thing. I mean, if males have come from disenfranchised backgrounds where maybe a parent has not been present or what have you, any number of situations, and they enter a brotherhood when they're in the military. They go through hell, and they go through a lot of very, very traumatizing training, but they come out the other side having bonded with the men that they've gone through that experience with, like brothers, and they really do see each other as family. And so, I think that's where a lot of it comes from, and that is part of the military recruitment and retention strategy, is to take people who have come from disenfranchised backgrounds and who are looking just like cult leaders or religious fanatics. It's exactly the same thing. They just seek out people who are lonely and who have no one to identify with and no one to kind of use as their emotional anchor or anything like that, and they put them through this kind of traumatic situation, almost like a form of disassociation in a way, and then throughout that process they grow to bond so deeply with the men around them that they pledge their life and their allegiance to that unit and that cause and anything they're told to do. So there's again, if we're talking about the military, we're always going to be talking about very sadistic, psychopathic attitudes and behaviors. And I think that the whole tattooing issue is probably just one of those factors.
And just like the piercing coming from a tribal origin, tattooing as well. You have the tattooing in native cultures in America, and then also through the South Pacific. The Samoan tattoos and Polynesian style tattooing. So
completely different style.
Yeah.
They actually dig into the skin there. I mean, I'm from New Zealand, and all the Maoris there, well, not all of them, but the ones who still wear the traditional moko on their face, I mean, it's actually chiseled in. So they're actually taking flesh out with each of those marks is actually an indentation. They're engraved and then they're dyed with ink. So it's pretty. They take it pretty seriously.
Yeah, and so it's a sign of you're a warrior, and so that's basically your warrior's mask that's tattooed right onto your face, and so there's a rite of passage definitely with that, and I think that the other side of not only is this a transhuman agenda, but the other side is that humanity has a need for rites of passage. And we don't have them anymore in the West, primarily. Yeah. The prom really doesn't cut it, No. Graduation does not cut it. So, and that's why you have people going, back to more sort of pagan celebrations, Beltane, Halloween, things like that. Because people have this need for this cyclical celebration of the seasons and natural forces and us as humanity belonging and being part of that and celebrating our part in all of that. And so I think that that's a very real need that's being used against people to turn them against themselves, I guess. For lack of
it's definitely something I can see. I mean, especially with this whole what I see personally with the whole issue of there being no real rites of passage, or at least not as many, and they're not as significant as there would have been in previous societies, people are turning to other forms of tradition and custom. Especially those that resemble, more, I suppose what you might call, more kind of paganistic rituals. Like the tattoos, and certain other, like certain haircuts, and then certain beliefs. And I think a lot of this stuff is being promoted in line with some of the sort of environmental propaganda. And I'm not sort of anti-environmentalist or anything like that, but when we look at all the tyranny that is being perpetrated and is planned to be perpetrated under things like United Nations Agenda 21 and all of this, chemtrailing and global warming stuff, and all of this stuff, the whole green revolution. I mean, people, I think, are being prepared and I guess familiarized with certain aspects of paganism which kind of tie into some of those agendas. And so we have this kind of sequence where people are devoid of any real rite of passage and sort of communal sense of identity and sense of belonging and sense of connection with the earth and the seasons, as you described. And so they sort of turn back to some of these, I guess, more pagan customs and traditions. But I think that a lot of that is being done and promoted and is being used as the surrogate for people because so many of the themes, some of the kind of, I suppose, what you might call earth worship and some of those types of, speaking very broadly, of course, some of those types of themes tie into these big, huge political, geopolitical, environmental agendas so well. And so, again, the need for people's, the need for people to have rites of passage and to have a sense of connection with the earth and with the seasons, with the people around them, and go through these experiences and gain something from them is being used against them, as you say.
Yeah, and it's natural for people to also want to sort of protect the environment as well as one rites of passage. People see this sort of needless, wasteful society and want an alternative to that. And
that's all. It's all the more effective for that reason, isn't it?
Right.
Because there is that genuine need and that genuine desire to want to take care of the planet and to want to live in a clean, balanced environment and to not be wasteful. I mean, that's just common sense, and everybody wants that. And so, again, that genuine, deep need and desire and sense of duty, responsibility, empathy, etc., can be twisted and turned into something else.
Yeah, kind of like the militant vegans, that this desire to be healthy, to not harm other living sentient beings, just to eat. All of those things get turned around, and I maybe perhaps the vegan diet isn't quite enough for the brain, as in terms of, if you look at nutrition from an evolutionary standpoint, human beings, consuming animal fat for thousands upon thousands of years, our brains need it, and so then that desire to be healthy sort of turns some people kind of sick and mentally deranged, I think, when they get really sort of like, you carcass eating freak, and I'm sure that there are some people that could eat a vegan diet and be healthy, because of whatever their genetic makeup, or they come from a people that hasn't been real reliant on meat, or but I just think generally most people need some sort of animal fat to think.
Yeah, I agree. I know for me personally, I do. I do know people who are vegans and who aren't pushy about it at all, but just feel that it's the healthiest option for them, and they do seem to be fairly healthy and mentally on the ball. I mean, I have met, of course, vegans who are at the opposite end of the spectrum, who are extremely pushy, but who are also a bit sort of slow upstairs, for lack of a better term. And again, I think this comes down to the lack of animal fats in the brain, and being used to develop and regenerate the brain. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a genetic thing, and yeah, some people can probably survive on it, but for the rest of us, yeah, I think we definitely do need animal fats, because I mean, there's been enough, I guess what you might call circumstantial research to suggest that the greatest leaps in terms of the development of the human brain throughout the millennia has been subsequent to starting to eat certain types of animal fats. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's necessarily an absolute thing by any means at all. And I do also think that, again, the vegan thing kind of ties into some of these, I guess, what you might call pagan themes that are coming through, that people are turning to as well. And that, again, all of this sort of ties right back into the same agenda, because if you look at some of these big environmental plans that are sort of being rolled out over the next few decades, they basically do involve the eradication of meat from the public diet. And so, yeah, I mean, we look at all these things, and they all sort of tend to be going in the same direction.
Yeah. You can eat cheese made from, like, I don't know, toe jam or something. I don't know, just weird stuff. They're making really weird stuff
as well.
Yeah, bugs. Yeah, insects. They're big on protein. Eat them up.
Yeah.
Dip them in your fondue. Yummy.
Yeah, that's the stuff they've been pushing over here for a while, actually. There's been plenty of articles in the UK media about how, bugs are actually really good for you. And, and by the way, fasting is really, really good for you as well. all this stuff about getting people to basically consume less in the name of saving the planet, et cetera, et cetera. And, I mean, that whole issue is another big, topic to deal with altogether. But yeah, I mean, there is definitely an agenda there. And a lot of what we're talking about here ties directly into that agenda. And the people who are involved in some of these movements and belief systems, I believe, are being used to further push that agenda without realizing it. So, yeah, I mean, transhumanism, environmentalism, I mean, if you talk about it for long enough, I mean, if you look at the connections deeply enough, they actually do tie together very, very directly in so many different ways. So yeah, I definitely look at all of this stuff as being very, very coordinated. Yeah, to be honest.
I would have to agree with that, and I think it's very tied into population control. I think that's what it's really about. Is that, especially Agenda 21, is getting the population out of the rural areas and into the cities and towns where they can be more controlled. And so for myself, I live in the woods, and there are sanctions for living in the woods, because they don't want regular people living in the woods. They only want the rich having big, huge estates out in rural areas. They don't want, rednecks and Indians and crackers living by the creek and fishing and just, living off the land.
Being independent, yeah.
Right.
That's the big thing with all of these environmental strategies, and especially Agenda 21, is the focus on interdependence, and that, I mean, some of these people even said things like, farming is too important to be left to farmers, and so it's all about interdependence, making sure that you, as a sovereign human being, will no longer have the legal right to actually sustain your own life and live off the land without any outside interference, and you must be in a confined city, having your entire life, your diet, everything controlled by a technocratic system. So yeah, pretty scary
stuff. And the other part of being in a natural environment like that, living in the woods, is that you have more opportunity to understand what interdependence really means, as far as in the real world, in the real natural world, not just as an intellectual exercise or as a controlled agenda to get you not independent anymore, feeding yourself, living off the land. And when you were talking before about farming's too important to leave to the farmer. I started to think about the whole Monsanto thing being a transhuman agenda, because we have to, we have to alter plants now because they're not good enough as they are. We have to, and people get mixed up about what Monsanto is doing and saying, oh, well, we've been hybriding, plants for a long time. It's not hybridization that they're doing. They're adding different genetic DNA sequences to plants that aren't of plants even.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, it's
way different.
It's not a hybrid between two different types of potato. It's a hybrid between a potato and a porcupine or something. It's crazy stuff. But yeah, I mean that Monsanto. I mean, they were a military-industrial corporation. I mean, they created Agent Orange for the Vietnam War. I mean. These people have been involved in bio-warfare far before they were involved in food, and now they basically are running a huge portion of the world's food supply. I mean, I think there's them and a couple of other conglomerates, but it's basically, it's all coming from them. And it's like, if you look at what's happened in the US and Canada with Monsanto, it's really horrific with the proliferation of these genetically modified seeds. All throughout all of the big bread baskets in the region, whether the farmers like it or not, and they're just they're pushed and conned and legally moved into a situation where they're forced to buy these what do they call the seeds that terminate upon the first yield. They don't yield any more seeds. And so these farmers are stuck having to buy seeds every single year purely from Monsanto, which is genetically modified. So again, that ties into the whole, basically the sort of, I guess what you might call this, this archaic sort of, I guess, Masonic elitist goal of perfecting that, which was left imperfect, in that they need to completely take control and ownership of the DNA of plants. And the DNA of humans, the DNA of animals, and have complete dominance and control over essentially the entire planet and everything in it. And I think what we're going to see in the future most likely is, Monsanto, if they're not already doing it, moving out into human genetic research and into there'll be some transhuman elements to that, I'm sure. I mean, I haven't heard anything so far, but I mean, if you look at what they're doing and what they have done, their track record, the type of company they are, the type of corruption and conspiracies that they've been involved in, then it would not surprise me at all if they've been doing genetic research on human beings, and that some of that has been part of the wider transhuman research and development project, if you will.
So they're still engaged in biowarfare, because the so-called food that's produced is in itself a biological warfare agent.
Well, it gives you. I mean, a lot of it gives you celiacs. I think some of it. I definitely know that some of the DNA vectors that have been changed, I think, in some of these seeds have the effect of passing straight through the intestinal wall, so they don't get digested properly. They don't get processed by liver or kidneys or anything like that whatsoever. They will literally seep through this DNA. These molecules will seep through your intestinal wall straight out into the bloodstream, into the body, and they're completely foreign and should never have been there in the first place. So I mean, when you look at it like that, it literally is biological warfare, because people are coming down with all types of gut diseases from this all over the place. And I mean, there was a law passed in the US, I think, was it 2012, 2013, where it was decided that no further lawsuits could be brought against Monsanto, period. Well, maybe not period, but in the context of people wanting to claim damages and compensation for illnesses and deaths that had occurred as a result from using their product. And this, goes right back up to the Roundup stuff, the weed killer, the Agent Orange stuff, and I think, to the current stuff with all of their genetically modified crops and seeds that they've been selling. There was a blanket law passed in the States a few years ago whereby, it was literally prohibited. I mean, they said you may not bring a lawsuit of this particular nature to this company. It will not be heard in court. So, I mean, they're moving ahead pretty fast there.
So there again, we have the so-called legal and justice system supporting the transhuman agenda. Yeah. And, that there's direct medical evidence, it's very substantial, that links all autoimmune disease to these genetically modified foods, as well as, intolerance to wheat. It's not, celiac is just one of, dozens and dozens of different types of intolerances to, and it's not really wheat. Well, it's intolerance to messed up wheat that's not really wheat anymore.
Glutens,
right. And so when it leaks out of the gut, anything like that leaks out of the gut, the immune system responds, and then it gets into a situation where it's attacking like proteins in the body.
Yeah,
and that's autoimmune disease. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's we've been talking for an hour. I wanted to give you the opportunity to go to bed if you need to. It's late over there.
Well, it doesn't look like Aaron's going to show up.
Right.
So I can stay on for another hour. Okay. That's cool.
All right.
So we can keep going for a while.
Okay. Great. All right. So let's get into a little bit more about Monsanto then, because they go back to before they were Monsanto. They were the GD Searle company, and that's I think who produced the artificial sweetener. That
was that?
Yeah.
Sorry, was that aspartame? Did you say?
Yes. Which is
it's horrific stuff. I actually feel sick whenever I have. I mean, I avoid it at all costs, but I will occasionally accidentally buy something which has aspartame in it, and I can immediately tell if it has aspartame in it because it makes me feel ill immediately.
Yeah, I can as well. Yeah, I get an instant migraine if I accidentally consume. If I accidentally consume it,
I just get really nauseous when I drink anything with aspartame in it. Just nausea.
And it is a neurotoxin. I mean, that's what it is, and it's actually a poison. So here again, we have biological warfare. So people are told, like people who are getting diabetes because they're eating genetically modified food and getting autoimmune disease, or that's one expression of intolerance to poison, are told to take another poison because their bodies can't handle sugar. And then they end up eating more because it's so sweet that they end up craving more sweetness. And so they gain weight instead of lose weight, and then they're addicted to this horrible poison that will give you neurological problems if you consume it long enough, because it's a neurotoxin.
This is what happens with so many other foods. I mean, this is why we have such high rates of obesity and of people being overweight in Western society, is because for the most part, the average person is eating food which is completely nutritionally deficient, and so they can go to the takeaway or the local supermarket or McDonald's or wherever and get a whole bunch of food. They can eat like a full kilogram of food, which is a lot, and still be hungry because the food itself is simply it's just simply it's just material. It doesn't really if you look at what's in it, it doesn't really qualify as food. It's just simply a whole bunch of kind of chemicals and fillers and taste, and things to make it taste a certain way. Gluten is one of the main ingredients that's used to stretch things out and make them go further. And so, if you look at the ingredients of the food that most people are eating, it's no surprise as to why you have such high rates of obesity and people being, if not obese, generally sort of overweight and unhealthy, is because they may be eating all this stuff which maybe doesn't look that unhealthy. It's kind of sold and marketed and packaged as being fairly healthy. But in reality, it is so nutritionally deficient that no matter how much people eat, they keep simply wanting more. And so they keep eating more, and hence the weight gain. So yeah, I mean, it's not just down to sweetness. I mean, this is happening in so many other areas, and with pretty much every vitamin and mineral the body needs is not being provided through the majority of the food that people are buying out of supermarkets. You know, if you really want to get the proper, you know, minerals and vitamins that you need to live, then you really need to be, you know, just eating a very, very simple diet, trying to get stuff that's non-GMO, trying to focus on just, you know, things like, you know, unprocessed meat and vegetables and things like that. But I mean, that stuff is so, you know, in a lot of places, at least anyways, is very hard to find and very hard to come by. And if you can find it, it's extremely expensive. So this is another way of manipulating the vast majority of the population into a situation where they're, again, being bio-attacked, you know, physically attacked and subverted and physically, biologically brought down and reduced in some way by the food that they're eating. And of course, you know, this will create problems which will you know, simply trigger the need for solutions and the demand for solutions, and those solutions will come about via, you know, transhuman and converging type technologies. So again, you know, I mean, all of these problems are essentially created so that the ultimate solution can be materialized as had been originally planned.
Right. Look at your body. It's not holding up, you know. It's under this multi-pronged attack against it, but it's not holding. It's failing. It's you know, it's not good enough, right?
Yeah.
So the obesity too is also linked to the destruction of the gut flora. So if you look at the gut flora of skinny people compared to the gut flora of overweight and obese people, is a totally different story. So, and again, diet sweeteners will destroy the gut flora, as well as the GMOs and all of these, you know, genetically modified foods, gluten, fast food, all that will destroy your gut flora immediately. And, you know, from the very beginning, as we talked about before with formula feeding, you're not lining your gut with that mucus. That mucus lining is what keeps things from seeping through out of the gut. So, it's a multi-pronged attack.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at all of these elements in our environment, especially, you know, over the last, say, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years, you know, seem to have been designed to, you know, in concert, attack and undermine the ability of the human body to function properly. And it really just does seem like another one of these auto-abkeo scenarios where, you know, it's, you know, problem, reaction, solution. You know, especially since I mean, there's a fantastic documentary called I think it was a Canadian documentary called "Disappearing Male," and what it was talking about was after the sort of the big I suppose petrochemical revolution of, you know, the sort of mid 20th century, and the invention of the automobile and the conversion of petroleum into all these different, you know, plastics and rubbers and all these other different applications. If we look at that point, if we look at that point onwards in history and the effect that it's had on the human body, it has been astounding. I mean, the documentary itself was going into the fact that ever since all of these sort of plastics have been added into our environment, I mean, especially when we're talking about things like bisphenol A and the baby bottles, and, you know, I'm sure you know about all that stuff, but so many other, you know, petrochemical elements that are used to package food, which are used to sort of package food, move food, some of which are even maybe added to food, household cleaning products, makeup, deodorants, all of these you know, consumables have been infused with very, very damaging chemicals, and the result in this particular documentary was that the average male Western sperm count. So the sperm count of the average Western male had dropped from about 1955 to I think it was 2005 by 75%. So males in I think it was 2005 were only were 75% less sterile than a male of 1955, and this was directly correlated, actually, to the introduction of all these petrochemicals into the environment, into the food, into the water, into all the consumables that we use in Western society. So again, that this is the creation of the problem to attack and undermine and subvert the human body, so that it results in so many problems that require a higher technological solution, to the point where people will not only sort of accept these transhuman converging technologies, but will actually demand them. And I mean, that demand is being created in so many different ways. I mean, not just on a biological level, but on a cultural level as well. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the biological level, I mean, this has been going on for so long. I mean, we've had all types of estrogens and different types of hormones introduced into the food, again, especially through male and female products like deodorants, makeup, that kind of thing. And you can really see it. I mean, you can see that women now tend to be a lot more aggressive than they were a few decades ago, and a lot of men seem to be a lot more feminine than they were a few decades ago. And you can even see the body shapes changing, and the way they act and speak changing, the psychology changing. And I really do believe that this has been a result of adding exogenous hormones into the consumables that we have been consuming in the Western world for the past however many decades. And again, this just all leads towards this undermining, subversion, confusion of what it means to be human, so that the transhuman technocrats can present their solution in the form of whatever they come up with next, implantable chips or nanobots or particles that can be injected into the bloodstream and report on your physiological condition, can be remotely controlled, and can literally update your cellular functioning, and via remote control or whatever it may be. I mean, all of these different converging technologies are being presented because the very same technocratic interests have basically completely attacked and undermined the human body, and have made us, for the most part, quite sick, and operating at a level which is lower, I think less desirable than it normally would have been had we not had this interference.
Yeah, and certainly birth rates have gone down dramatically. I mean, it's a wonder anybody has a baby because of all this stuff. And for women, eating, go back to the vegan diet, soy has plant estrogens in it, and people are always talking about how this is not good for males, but it's actually not good for females either, because when the estrogen levels are raised above normal in the female, and there's no pregnancy or anything like that to as the cause, the androgen levels also raise to meet that higher estrogen level. So when a woman is experiencing abnormal high estrogen levels, she's also going to have higher androgen levels as well. And that's where you get this sort of proliferation of diseases of the female reproductive system, like polycystic ovarian disease. That's huge. And in any given day, I can walk down the street and see several women that I know have it just by looking at them, because they have hirsutism, so they're suffering from, facial hair, and they're overweight because their hormones are out of whack, their gut flora is out of whack, they're eating, food-like substances that isn't really food, it's terrible. And you go to the medical community, women go to the medical community for, help with these things. And these women are treated as though there's something wrong with them. Not that their bodies are responding completely normally to this multi-prong attack against them, but there's something wrong with you, so we're gonna give you more hormones or more drugs to sort out the situation.
Yeah. Well, that's always the modality, and that's always the rationale. Is that, I mean, if we look at things like all of these new diseases which seem to have popped out of the woodwork over the last 50, 60 years, I mean, the amount of cancers and then the number, I mean, in terms of the number of instances of cancer and the types of cancer that are coming out have just skyrocketed. But we have so many different types of diseases and illnesses and cancers that we just simply didn't have 50, 60 years ago. We have so many different types of so-called mental illnesses and disorders which we didn't have maybe 50, 60 years ago. And what this is people trying to adapt to an unnatural, extraneously imposed system of economics, of food and agriculture, of culture, and not being able to respond to it, having their bodies react badly to it, going into depressions over it, and not being able to handle life, all different kinds of side effects and fallout, etc. And when they go to see as you say, the medical community about these issues that they're having, they're simply labeled as having some kind of disorder. It's not that, they never look at, okay, what are you eating? What's your exercise regime like? Are you getting these minerals? Are you avoiding these products? They don't do a blood count and figure out, or an allergen test or any of that stuff. It's simply, oh no, you're unwell, therefore we must classify it as a disorder and prescribe you very profitable medication for it. And of course, as we know, so many of these doctors, I mean, it's especially bad in the US with the private healthcare system over there, where you've got these doctors who are just being paid off huge sums of money to promote different pharmaceutical products and to prescribe them to people who maybe didn't need them and who really just need to be looking at their diet and the stuff they're consuming. So yeah, I mean, it's once again, I mean, it's a situation where the human being as a whole, in every way possible, is being attacked, is being made sick, is being made dysfunctional, is being made unhappy, is being made depressed, and is then the medical community just decides to reclassify what are essentially natural human responses to unnatural circumstances as disorders, and therefore once it's classified as a disorder, they can sell you their cure. So again, it's the whole auto out of chaos kind of scenario where they will hurt you and break you and bring you down, and then tell you that you're the problem and that the only way that you can get out of this problem and resolve this situation is to buy their solution. And so this is happening with the food, with the medications, this is happening with the diseases, with the technology, the transhumanism. I mean, it's even happening culturally as well. I mean, it's again, it's being done on every level, and I see this as all being very coordinated, and because when you look at the detail in which all of these different aspects and all these different agendas linked together to one another and all seem to be heading in the same direction, it's hard to come to any other conclusion.
And it's overwhelming. I mean, it's so interconnected and multi-pronged that it's like it's coming at you from all sides. And I've spent the last couple of years looking at it, and I can only look at it for so long because I get completely overwhelmed. I mean, when you're talking about the medical community, I mean, in America, it's not even set up to incentivize a good outcome. It's incentivized for bad outcomes.
Yeah, well, they make more money that way.
Yeah, way more. Whereas, at least in, countries that have some form of socialized medicine, some of them are set up where it's incentivized to have a good outcome because the government doesn't want to spend more money on sicker people. So the doctors are incentivized to actually try to really help the patient. Yeah.
I mean, the whole private healthcare, public healthcare debate is just something I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the whole thing because I mean there are certain benefits to it. Over here in the UK, we have the NHS, the National Health Service, and you get free consultations with the doctor, free prescriptions and stuff like that. So, there can be a sort of a convenience factor there, I suppose, but the incentive there is all outcome based. It's all about seeing a certain number of patients within a certain, number of hours during the day. It's about meeting targets. And so, and I also think there's definitely a degree of some of these doctors being paid off to promote and prescribe certain medications, because I've had direct experience with them trying to push this stuff on me when I don't need it. But I mean, back to the whole issue of sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What were we talking about before?
I don't know, but I will. I don't know where you're going to go with that, but I will say that I think either way, just to finish off the medical thought, either way, your power as a consumer or as someone needing medical assistance is taken away. Either way, whether it's socialized medicine or privatized, your power is just taken away in different ways.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, what I was going to say is, I just wanted to add on the fact that, I mean, I find it almost painfully laughable when I see some of these cancer awareness charities and such, and I see all of these news articles about scientists being one step closer to curing cancer, and they might be there, and it might happen, and when you think about how far ahead technology really is at the top levels of, say, like the military-industrial complex, and the billions and billions of dollars that are funded into that, and that includes, everything from jet planes to genetics. You know what I mean? It's everything, really. I mean, I think the technology is probably a lot further ahead than the public are led to believe, and so, I mean, it stands to reason that I think a cure for most of the world's most prevalent diseases have probably been found by now, and that things like something like a cure for most cancers probably has been discovered in some way, but there would be no incentive for them to actually sell that on the open market, because it's far more profitable to keep people dying off of cancer because it's a population reduction method, and B, keep the whole cancer industry running and keep all of those hospitals, physicians employed, and make a hell of a lot of money by treating people for decades, perhaps, on drugs, rather than giving them, selling them one lot of drugs and having them cured, So, I just thought I wanted to add that in there, because I guess it's more intuition than anything else. But, when I look at how far technology has come in so many other areas and with the sort of educated assumption that it is in fact a lot farther ahead at the higher levels that the public are not privy to, then I mean this whole sort of cancer thing is really a bit of a joke, I think, and I think it's really, really cruel as well. But again, I mean it fits perfectly into the agenda of wanting to reduce the population and enable an industry to continue to function, which is extremely profitable. Both in terms of reducing the amount of humans on the planet, but whilst also extorting every last possible bit of energy, money, and whatever else you can out of them. So, yeah.
Well, the fact that chemotherapy is still in the lineup of accepted forms of treatment speaks for itself. I mean, because it has such a low success rate. And it's so destructive to the patient that it's, that in itself, I think, is proof that there's something terribly, terribly wrong.
I mean, it's also back to front, that whole thing. I mean, it just reminded me of the whole concept of, of the past, say, 15, 20 years, and at least in the countries I've lived in, they've always, they have been increasingly promoting the whole breast cancer awareness thing, and they've been doing these sort of free, tests where a big sort of medical truck will park up somewhere in a community, and women from around the area can come and get the mammogram done. And you look at these women, and, they're getting breast cancer 10, 15 years later, and it's probably because they've come in freaking out, thinking, "Oh gosh, I better check whether I've had breast cancer," getting their breasts, exposed to a massive dose of radiation, and then, whoop-de-shit, they actually get breast cancer 10 years later. So again, this is a system that is creating a problem in order to offer the solution at our detriment. So.
Right. And I don't have personal experience with cancer in the medical system, but I have personal experience with autoimmune disease, and I struggled for years trying to find out what the hell was wrong with me. And these doctors knew. They knew that it had to be something that I was, allergic to eating. And not one of them lifted a finger or was the slightest bit curious to find out. Yeah. What they do when you start exhibiting symptoms of being poisoned, like neurological symptoms, like migraines, for instance, feeling cold all the time, muscle and joint pain, all that stuff is, obvious signs of poisoning. And that's not what they test for. They test for the top 3 things on the list that it could be, the 4th being gluten. They never test for in that. That's design. That's by design, because they would rather label you as fibromyalgia, which doesn't exist. Fibromyalgia is bullshit. All it is something that we could call your response to being poisoned so that we can charge insurance. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is we're not going to fucking help you, is what it means. We're going to experiment on you with drugs, and we're going to tell you something's wrong with you. But it's all mysterious and you're weird.
My mum has actually been, battling with that for years, the fibromyalgia thing, and only recently she's discovered through, she recently moved to Germany and has been seeing some German doctors who are a little bit more attentive, and they did a whole bunch of, tests and scans and blood tests and realized that it was far more complex than that, and that they felt that it wasn't really fibromyalgia, and it was actually a whole bunch of other different things that previous doctors simply had no, again, they had no sort of motivating factor or sort of they had no reason to try and actually resolve the problem and to actually try and cure the disease. It was simply a matter of prescribing her this lot of drugs, and then she would come back 2 weeks later and they'd send her to a different specialist and he would prescribe her a whole bunch of other drugs, and they would have a side effect, and so she had to take another bunch of drugs, and this literally went on for the better part of 10 years until she actually went to see some physicians who did a bit more investigation and realized that it wasn't simply just fibromyalgia and that you're weird because you're not responding to our pills properly. It was something far more complex. And it had a lot to do with certain, hormone levels and food intolerances and all kinds of stuff. So, I've had other family members go through similar experiences as well, where they've battled with 5, 6, 7 years with different doctors trying to figure out what the hell is wrong with them, not having the proper tests done, with these lazy doctors just, writing off prescription after prescription and testing them out on all these different drugs, putting them through hell. And then it takes them, all this time to actually find someone like maybe a really highly qualified naturopath to go and do the proper tests and find out what the actual problem is. And it's only at that point where they actually start to improve. So, the mainstream medical system is in no way geared towards actual curing or resolving any medical problems. It's geared towards maintaining the pharmaceutical industry, keeping people weak and dependent on medication, and giving them instilling the expectation within them that a higher, more advanced form of pharmaceutical or biotechnological technology in the future will be the answer to all of their medical woes. So again, all of this stuff ties into the overall transhuman agenda.
Yes, and the transhuman agenda being that you're not perfect the way you are. You need to be altered or changed, and that your body fails. It's not that it's held up in a tremendously amazing way under the multi-pronged attack, but that it's failing you because it's flawed in some way. I also wanted to sort of bring into this whole medical thing is that when you go to doctors in America for these chronic type conditions, you're infantilized, so you're not part of the process. And doctors, when they encounter a patient that wants to be part of the process and make the decisions, many times part of what they're prescribing to you is to dumb you down so that you become more compliant with whatever they want to do with you.
Well, it's funny because they actually go through psychological training. I know at least in the medical schools in the UK and the different hospital training programs in the UK, they actually go through psychological training, which is designed to instill in them a dominant sort of persona to project upon the patient. And so they're actually taught quite specifically how to dominate a patient, how to sort of refute any doubt. And of course, they pass this all off as being, it's about instilling confidence in the patient and making the patient feel safe and all this kind of stuff. But again, I've had the same experience when I've tried to be participatory in my own recovery and tried to sort of engage and discuss and sort of try and be part of it and figure things out for myself and try and have some input into the situation. And you're just basically treated like a child, told you don't know anything, told to shut up, and given some pills to swallow,
Yeah, it's very disempowering. And I noticed too that with the chronic illnesses that cause a lot of pain, they get you hooked on painkillers that don't even help the pain. But you're hooked on that, and then you're treated like a criminal because you need the drugs they got you hooked on. Yep. So you go to pain management, and then they test your, you got to pee in a cup to make sure you're not taking more than they're giving you, or anything else. Like, God forbid you be, taking cannabis to help with your, chronic pain. Yeah. Then you get kicked out, which is probably the best thing that would ever happen to you. Getting kicked out.
They're a little bit easier on that over here. The doctors and the ones that I've dealt with, they're okay about that. They understand that it's actually we know that a lot of people do smoke it, and it does have a significant pain reduction factor or effect. So it's not quite as bad, but I can imagine it being worse in the States. But yeah, regardless, I remember getting sciatica really badly once from an old injury, which was re-triggered a few years ago. And they got to the point where I couldn't even stand up straight or walk. It was so bad. And all the doctors did was simply give me a whole massive packet of tramadol, really, really powerful opiate analgesic, and just kept prescribing them. He didn't want to know, was my condition improving? He had no interest in referring me to a chiropractor or a osteopath or anything like that. Because osteopathy is actually not recognized by the official NHS over here. It's regarded as some kind of fringe, alternative, unofficial treatment that's laughed upon by the true academics, etc. When in fact it's actually been the only thing that's ever really worked for me. But regardless, I've had direct experience with that, where they literally will just keep doling out hundreds and hundreds of these really, really strong painkillers without any care as to whether you're getting better or not. They're just giving you something to numb the pain and make you go away, because they've got somebody else to deal with. So again, nothing to do with any kind of incentive towards resolution or towards curing. More just it's just basically maintaining you, and maintaining it at a sort of a basic functional level, in terms of you're not in absolute screaming agony all the time. You've got pills to kind of numb the effect a wee bit. And again, there's this this again just ties into everything we've been talking about here.
Right, yeah. And in the States, and there's only a few states where medical marijuana is legal, I guess. Well, semi-legal, sort of, I don't know, on a state level. But in all the other states, in pain management clinics, even doctors who know medically that cannabis could help a patient, and actually, all of the drugs that they're giving them actually harms them, shuts their guts down, and and is physically addicting. Even those doctors legally, here we have the legal system again supporting the transhuman agenda, legally can't allow their patients to take cannabis. Yeah. They have to kick them out of the program.
even though they know it, they
Right.
know it's having a benefit, an actual benefit and a positive effect. Their contract will probably say that, you must not in any way condone this. If you get caught actually telling someone that this is okay, or permitting it, or continuing to see them once they've been taking it, they probably, face some kind of trouble in some way or another.
Absolutely,
at
get
least in the
shut down.
states where it hasn't been.
Yeah, so they can actually have a doctor can have a patient that comes in taking, let's say they have to take 4 Percocets a day. All right? Patient starts using cannabis medicinally and goes down to 2. 1 in the morning, 1 at night. They still can't allow that patient who's taking less of a highly toxic substance for excruciating daily pain. They still can't legally allow that because somehow people who make ridiculous laws know something about medicine, and no, they don't, but they're still making the laws regarding it.
Oh yeah. It's all so backwards, and there's always a far greater ulterior motive to the whole thing. You always find that someone way higher up the food chain will end up benefiting from the status quo or the way things are. It's the whole cannabis debate it's kind of a tricky one, because there are two interpretations of what's happening with that, and I can definitely see both sides of it. So it's kind of a weird one, but
definitely the GMO Monsanto taking GMO marijuana, that's really scary, because they're going to, just like they've taken the nutrition out of food, they're going to take all the medicine out of cannabis. So that's really scary.
They'll probably just create some amazingly high super strain, which is 50% THC or something like that, but doesn't contain any of the other particular cannabinoids or other molecules within the plant that have different types of healing effects. Because it's not just the THC. There are other molecules as well which affect your physiology in different ways. And so, I can definitely see that being the case in the future. And I remember even kind of theorizing with Thomas Sheridan on this one about how, in the future we may even see, getting back to the whole DMT thing, we may even see some of these big biotech companies starting to move into the production of some of these drugs. I think as they start to become more and more legalized, because that seems to be a trend that we're seeing now, despite resistance from some quarters, it does seem to be a trend that is becoming more and more prevalent. We've got more and more states in the US allowing for medical marijuana, and I think in the next 5-10 years we're going to see a loosening up of the laws across the UK and Europe, and I can see kind of DMT kind of creeping in with that in some way, and with the whole argument being that it is, as Terence McKenna would say, it is part of us. It is our sort of our counterpart from the plant kingdom. We evolved along with it, and it's something natural. And they'll kind of equate it to cannabis use. And I can definitely see, within the not so distant future, things like cannabis and things like DMT being produced by these big biotech companies and being bioengineered to, some horrible effect where, yes, they're very powerful in some way, and they probably will be, very, very strong and popular for that reason. But the true, I suppose what you might call the deeper, more profound benefits, the more nuanced benefits, the subtler benefits of it are completely gone altogether. And that will be by design, I'm sure.
Well, absolutely, and that's really what every pharmaceutical substance is. It's the synthesized derivative of only one part of a medicinal plant that doesn't have any of the other parts of that medicinal plant to balance it out and help your body process it. And as far as the cannabis thing, I see both sides too, but I think it's just two sides of the same coin, which is you have a movement, and this is what the psychopaths in charge always do. You have a movement of people who are like, look, this people shouldn't be losing their homes and their kids just because they want to smoke a joint to unwind at night. That's ridiculous. So a movement starts to, spread some sanity and truth about the marijuana conspiracy and why it was made illegal around the world, which wasn't based in science or anything like that. Is, pure propaganda. So you have this pure movement that starts, and then it gets co-opted by the psychopaths that say, okay, this is unstoppable, so we need to co-opt it now so that we can get what we need out of it. So,
yeah,
it's to me, I mean, that's what I see. Happening.
I mean, definitely. That's definitely what I would see as well. It's like any concept. I mean, concepts in terms of their objectivity. Once you objectify a concept, it is neither moral or immoral. It simply is, and it is the application of that concept in a subjective fashion, which gives it some kind of moral resonance or lack thereof. And so with all of these different movements and that people get involved with, whether it be kind of anything from like gay rights to cannabis usage or what have you, regardless of whatever good, well-founded, educated intention, or at least genuine intention may lie behind the roots of that movement in some way, it will always end up being co-opted, and everybody in these big groups always ends up being used against everybody else in the grand scheme of things. And throughout this dialectical process, we just see again and again down through history where we have the pro on one side, the anti on the other, and they just go back and forth until a synthesis or a third way is eventually reached, whereby that third way, that resulting outcome, was simply the intended outcome of the architects of these two groups in the first place. So again, everything seems to sort of merge together, and again, you see the coordination at hand. When all of these unsuspecting, unwitting people who get involved with whatever movement it is, for well-founded reasons, again, or at least good intention reasons, end up being used to their own detriment. They end up being used to take their own freedoms away in the long run. They end up being driven into some worse situation they were in before, on the pretense that they're doing something for the betterment of themselves and of mankind in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking of the more sort of militant aspects of even the environmental movement. So the tree hugging, the sort of destroying the machines that are cutting the forest down, that kind of thing. And I wonder if those, even they were just sort of started by agent provocateurs that wanted to create this, like you're talking about, this pro and this con, and then this synthesis, and then, what we're looking at now.
Well, I definitely think so with the environmental movement. I mean, people always complain about the fact that, the people who kind of question the environmental movement and question global warming, they're all agents. They're all people who are paid by the oil companies and paid by evil fascist governments and blah, blah, blah. But when you actually look at the some of these environmental movements and some of the stories that and goings on within them, they're completely ridden with infiltrators and with police and like undercover police, agent provocateurs, all these people. And so this is being documented at a number of occasions in the UK, where we've had like undercover policemen from Special Branch, going into these environmental movements, actually posing as genuine sort of hippie environmentalists. One of them even got like married to someone and sort of led this double life where he had his real family back, at home, and whilst for half the week, and then the other half the week he was living this separate life as a fake environmentalist with his kind of fake environmentalist wife. And I mean, it goes very, very deep. So Yeah, I think this is the case for most movements, though. The intelligence agencies have got such a good handle on the pulse of the public that any movement that starts up, even if it's not really threatening, or even if it is perhaps heading in a direction which the power structure would probably benefit from in the long run, it will always be infiltrated by people who will make sure that it keeps on the track that it's supposed to be going on. And if it deviates from that course, they will be sure to, take a leadership role and steer it back on the direction they want it to go in, and make sure that any sort of troublesome people within that movement who ask too many questions, or who try and influence things to their own advantage, are taken care of, or minimized, or subverted in some way. So yeah, all movements are most certainly used against one another in some way, and the people who are in them, as good-hearted and as well-meaning as they may be, always end up just being used as pawns on the chessboard to further enslave themselves without realizing it. And that is often one of the most painful and frustrating things about trying to, about looking at these people in these situations, or trying to engage with these people, is the complete, oblivious nature as to the larger picture, the grander scheme of things that's in play.
Yeah, it's frightening, and you have to think about the type of personality that it takes in order to live that sort of double life that you described, and definitely there's got to be some sort of pathology involved in being able to pull that off.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've had direct experience with a number of infiltrators, and they all have the same personality profile. Whether or not they're clinical psychopaths, I don't know, but they all have the exact same. They have basically all or most of the traits of a clinical psychopath. So if they're not, they're at least proto-psychopaths who have been raised in military, intelligence, police type backgrounds, very, very rigorous discipline, probably traumatized a lot, put through some kind of disassociative, mind control program of some sort to, turn them into these, efficient compartmentalizing machines where they can be one person, to do one job, and then completely change personalities altogether to do another. And neither of those personalities are really original or unique, neither of them are ingenuous or substantive or real in any way. They're literally manufactured for the purpose of obtaining an outcome, of achieving a mission. So yeah, I've dealt with them on numerous occasions, and these are even just in very, very minor, small situations. So they pay attention to absolutely every little thing that pops up here and there. Any murmuring or any rumbling of any sort of dissatisfaction within a community, and you can be sure that you'll have one of these guys paying attention. And if you start to try and get involved in activism, you can expect to have somebody come along to listen to what you're doing, to make sure that you don't go into any areas that are too controversial, troublesome, or threatening. And yeah, it's pretty well sewn up, unfortunately, it looks like, for the most part. I don't see any real big movements or groups out there regarding any of these issues that don't seem to have been infiltrated, or at least co-opted, or at least in some way steered off into some direction that will ultimately lead most of the people who are following it right back into the same mess they were in before.
So we're under this multi-pronged attack, and those of us who find the strength through that to try to address these issues that we've somehow been able to think our way out of a paper bag and figure out, then we have to deal with this crap.
Yeah, no, it's just the worst part about it is it's not the truth, and finding out about all of these certain, I suppose, conspiratorial matters, and coming to high levels of awareness about how the world really works, and how you work, and how you relate to the world, and all of these deep, profound questions. It's hard enough dealing with all of that and all of the fallout that comes from that, all these strained relationships and, broken friendships and, not being able to relate to people. Without having to deal with the fact that you've actually got, paid professionals who are being sent out there to try and counter you and subvert you and neutralize you at almost every turn. So yeah, it can be quite a challenge sometimes, but it's one of those things that it comes with the job, I suppose.
Do you think that limiting your social media usage or profile can be an advantage to this sort of situation?
It can be. I do limit it. I mean, I still use social media, and I mean, I have an iPhone and all the rest of it. I live in a city, I work a job. It's kind of hard not to. You're almost expected to have a smartphone these days. But I do try and limit it as much as I can. But my only hesitation in deliberately trying to really, really withhold information from any kind of social media or any kind of electronic delivery system that can be tracked is the fact that the moment you start doing that, if you're kind of the frequency of your information and the rate in which it's being published starts to drop off all of a sudden, you'll immediately become a prime suspect. Their interest in you will skyrocket. Once you start hiding your communications, they will go to additional lengths to find out more about you. And so I think it can sometimes be easier to just try and find some kind of happy medium, for lack of a better word, in terms of your use of social media and what you are and are not willing to say over social media. I mean, there's certain things I will never talk about over the wire, but I think I will allow myself to, I guess, find some kind of balance in terms of, utilizing these things as a tool, to help me in various ways, but, to not give away too much. But again, I mean, I would prefer not to give away anything at all, and I do get quite frustrated that all this stuff is tracked and traced and listened to and logged and analyzed. But at the same time, I know that I think for myself and for many other people out there, if they stopped using social media and electronic communications as much, and if their kind of traffic rate dropped down and died off all of a sudden, I think they would find themselves in a position where the people who were previously listening to them and analyzing what they were saying would take greater measures to find out, okay, why is this person all of a sudden gone quiet? Why have they gone on sort of silent running here? What's the deal with the radio silence? We need to find out what this person's up to. And I think for that reason, you may end up encountering more trouble. So, I mean, that's just my particular theory. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is better to try and limit your use of social media altogether. I mean, I only use Facebook for my karate club, and that's it. I mean, and a few friends and family. I barely use it at all. It's really just sort of an address book to keep up to date on very basic things. But yeah, I mean, I think I've found. I mean, there's even articles. I remember seeing an article in I think it was the Telegraph or the Guardian over here. They were talking about the fact that some new scientific study, in inverted commas, of course, had discovered that if you did not have a social media account such as Facebook, you were far more likely to be a psychopath. And so it was all spun as being, only psychopaths don't go on social media. When, of course, that's the exact opposite truth. I mean,
yes,
that's one of the best tools. They love that shit. That's how they do their work. But I mean, they spun it, of course, as so as to cast suspicion on anybody who would overtly withdraw or refuse to take part in social media by suggesting that person, had some kind of some reason to want to hide something and should therefore be treated with suspicion. So, I mean, the culture is definitely very much moving in that direction now, whereby, I mean, when people ask me if I watch television, I say no. They can't believe it. They're stunned, and people ask me why I don't post more on Facebook, and I just tell them that I don't really like it and I don't really want to use it that much. I don't really get much out of it. I think it's a waste of time, and I don't really like my personal information being shared. And they look at you with a completely blank face. So it's the whole thing is. It's a compromise. It's one of those things that I just kind of have to deal with, and I try and utilize technology to assist me in the ways that I need it to assist me to get by in the world. But I don't put out too much information out there. But at the same time, my personal, theory is that for someone who all of a sudden dropped off the radar, who had limited it altogether, I think they've probably become more of a target. But and again, we've got this scenario where the culture is moving more and more towards the expectation that if you don't use social media and if you don't partake in pop culture, then people are actually beginning to see you as suspicious. And again, what I was talking about before is that I've, actually seen this in first person in real life, direct experience with expressing the fact that I don't really partake in social media. I don't really have an interest in television, and people are actually suspicious of you now for that. So yeah, it's gotten to that level already.
Wow. Well, it's definitely a constant struggle for me, because it is time consuming. And so I'm always working on that balance of, wanting to promote what I'm doing, and then also, wanting to spend my time in the real world.
Yeah.
Working on my real relationships. Not that my relationships aren't real with people I know over social media, but, being in the present moment,
Well, yeah, you've got to prioritize that. I think that's what's most important. I remember when I was, like in my early 20s, I was, obsessed with like MySpace and stuff, and spent hours, and I literally spent like a couple of years just, pretty much all of my free time was just, tweaking it and doing friend requests and all that kind of stuff. And it really just occurred to me as just my life passing me by, and it really just did feel like such a waste of time, and it became so addictive. And then Facebook came in, and people just went mental for it, and it changed the world overnight. And all of a sudden, your grandmother was on Facebook, and your dog was on Facebook, and everyone was trying to convince you to get on Facebook. And I remember looking at it at the time and just thinking, what the hell is the purpose of this thing? What a complete waste of time. I'm not saying it's, good to, I'm not saying it's not useful to promote things, because of course it obviously is. But when you look at the way people, treat it these days, if I'm at work, for example, I go out on like a cigarette break or a lunch break or whatever, and I see people, everyone's got their smartphone out, and everybody's texting away on Facebook constantly. If you look on the bus, that's what they're doing, and look on the street, that's what they're doing. And I even remember seeing an article, I think again it was in the Guardian or something, talking about the fact that a survey had been done, and they found that some amazingly high percentage of women were so addicted to Facebook that they would actually check their Facebook in the morning before they did anything else. So if they were busting to go to the bathroom, if they needed to go to work, that would come a second. They would check their Facebook first. And so that is really the world we're living in now.
Wow, I can't imagine checking it before having coffee in the morning.
Yeah, I know. It's just
their priorities.
I know.
That's incredible.
But again, this is all heading towards the whole transhuman agenda. This so-called singularity ideology, which will not come about in the way that Ray Kurzweil tells you it will. Don't buy that piece of baloney for a moment. But it is all heading towards this collectivized, centralized, digitized, virtual system of complete scientific control over everything. And I see Facebook as being a really, really crucial step in that direction, culturally speaking, more than anything else, but also, technologically speaking as well.
So we see the transhuman agenda involved in, our need for rites of passage, so using that against us, and now our need for community and our loss of real community is being exploited with social media. So it gives us that feeling that we have community when the one that we're living in is all around us and we're not engaging with that community. So
all of these internet type applications like Facebook and all the rest of it, and they're supposed to be bringing the world closer together and allowing you to talk to people overseas and whatnot. And of course that's true, but at the same time, really, when you look at it, it is isolating people further and further, and it is taking away that sense of community. And so the more this whole virtual internet world where we're increasingly living in takes away that sense of community and that need to go through your rituals and have some sense of communion and commonality with others, the more you desire it. And the more you desire it, the more you'll take any substitute that's handed to you from these companies that are developing these types of technologies. So again, it all comes back down to creating the problem and then basically putting you in a position where you've got no choice but to demand a solution, which they're all too happy to provide you with in the form of an even bigger problem, which will require an even more dramatic solution, and so on it goes.
And social media is a psychopath's paradise. They can create as many false personas as they want to manipulate however many targets they choose. So it really is. But I also think that there may be an aspect of that creating proto-psychopaths, because it's training on creating a false persona when you create your profile.
It does, yeah. I mean, it creates almost a sense of schizophrenia between people where, they've got their online persona, which is perfectly sculpted and molded in just the way they want it to be, and they can present this idealized version of themselves to the world, versus the real them, well, not the real them, but the other persona that they have to put on when they're, in public or whatnot. And so, it does create a sort of a schism there, where you've got this, sort of pathological, psyche at work where, people have literally been sort of split into two personalities and behaving pathologically in one or the other, because neither really is their true identity. It's kind of been lost in this kind of, this dichotomy that's been created through the use of social media.
Well, my goodness, it's already 9 o'clock here and 2 o'clock there in the morning. I really appreciate you staying up so late to talk to me. And perhaps we will perhaps I might turn this into a series as well, because I think we could definitely, if it wasn't so late, continue this conversation. So, thank you again for joining me, and if you would like any last words, you can.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. It's always been an interesting discussion, and I'm sure we'll have many more, because as you say, there are so many things to talk about. Apologies, I was a bit sort of off today. I was just really, really tired, and I'm feeling pretty scatterbrained at the moment, so I kind of lost my train of thought there on a number of occasions. But I think it was a good discussion nonetheless. And so thanks for having me on, and I look forward to our next one.
Thanks so much, Adam. I'm going to kick it out with a victory song.
Kashelaya pitawa pahacha, eyuha